Hi, I'm Yuri Leite, and this is a very brief introduction to South America. So before we move to Brazil and biodiversity, I want to give you some general overview of the whole continent. So this is a space view of South America. We have the countries listed on the map here. So we have Brazil, which occupies roughly half of South America, the eastern part, and we have border with all other South American countries except Ecuador and Chile. So we have borders with all of them, and we have also an extensive coast facing the Atlantic Ocean. Okay. So for this first introduction, we're going to talk a little bit about plate tectonics and how South America got this current size and shape and the current connections with other continents. Actually, the connection between South America and Central America and also North America is a relatively recent one. This happened after what we call the Great American Biotic Interchange, after the two continents connected just a few million years ago, not that long ago in terms of evolutionary terms or in geological terms. We're going to talk a little bit about the elevation zones of the continent, the biomes as a whole, just a tiny bit on the diversity, how it's distributed throughout the continent, and also a little bit about human occupation, okay? So just to give you a very rough and brief overview, South America was part of a continent, of a supercontinent called Gondwana. And you can see here about 150 million years ago, before Gondwana, we had Pangaea, which was one continent that was split into two. Gondwana, which is this huge landmass, and represents what we have today as South America, Africa, India, Australia, Antarctica. They were all together, okay? And at about 150 million years ago, Gondwana was already splitting into two parts, Eastern and Western Gondwana. And so you see here this division here. You see that South America was still connected to Africa. But you see that Madagascar and India were already separating from Africa. It was the beginning of the separation. As time passed by, at about 90 million years ago, we already have a clear separation between South America and Africa, but we still have a connection between South America and Antarctica, and also Antarctica to Australia. That's very important for biodiversity because animals and plants, they could move around here. They disperse through this corridor. And another interesting thing is that Antarctica was not a frozen continent at that time. So we actually had forests here. Antarctica as a frozen continent is relatively recent. It started about 30 million years ago, so way after this period here. And then at about 50 million years ago, with the breakup between South America and Antarctica, then you start having you change the currents, the oceanic currents, then you have the opening of the Drake Passage here, and then you have a circulation here that would eventually lead to the decline in the temperature of Antarctica. Then Antarctica got frozen after that. And then South America was an island, just huge island for a long period of time, between 50 and, well, that depends. We're going to talk about that, but 2010, down to 3 million years ago. Okay, was the final closure of the Panama Isthmus, reconnecting South America to North America, or connecting South America to North America. Okay, so for a long time, South America was an island. Okay, and in this island, a lot of species evolved and became unique. And there are many species that you can find only here in South America because of this isolation during many tens of millions of years. And this is after, so when South America finally connected to North America with the formation with what we call the Panama Isthmus, there was a huge. This event had a great impact on Earth as a whole, because first of all, it separated the Atlantic Ocean, or the Caribbean Sea, from the Pacific Ocean. Before this connection, you had waters could cross from one side to the other here. After we close here, so we change the ocean circulation, and you also change the climate, the weather. Okay, so many scientists attribute the closure of the Panama Strait to the onset of glaciation in the North Pole, in the Northern Hemisphere. Okay, so the huge glaciation that started in the Northern Hemisphere in the Pleistocene, especially because of the closure of the Panama Isthmus and this isolation between the two oceans, and the complete change in the ocean circulation patterns. But and you also had an isolation. It's like marine animals from this area and this area got isolated. So the closure was a barrier for marine animals that could not cross, and therefore you divide the populations of fish and crustaceans and shrimps and so forth and so on, and then you have speciation occurring. So species evolved in isolation on both sides of Central America. But for terrestrial animals, like especially mammals and some birds, the connection between North and South America was a huge event, because animals that were in North America, such as the ones depicted here, carnivores such as foxes, horses, wild pigs, deer, relatives to the elephant, bonfatiers, they all came from North America and invaded South America. Some rodents, rabbits, and also animals that evolved in South America, such as giant sloths and glyptodons and macaws, the terror birds, or some rodents, toxodons. So several of them moved, which were evolving in South America, moved to North America and conquered North America. So it was a two-way highway here. Central America served as a two-way highway. And animals went from south to the north and from the north to the south. Okay, the timing of this event is very controversial. Until about 10 years ago or 20 years ago, it was pretty much established that the closure of the Panama Isthmus was at about 2.8 to 3 million years ago. So basically, in the beginning of the Pleistocene. Okay. But recent papers, recent evidence point to a much older closure, or at least a process that started a long time ago. So this paper here, for example, by Jaramillo, he showed like 19 million years ago, you still have a Central American seaway, so a connection between the Caribbean waters and the Pacific waters, okay, the Pacific Ocean. But as you go to 10 million years ago, this closure is probably pretty much closed. It may have some connection, but most of it is already closed. So they propose that the closure of the Panama Strait actually started at 10 million years ago. And then it was more and more evident until about 2.8, 3 million years ago, 4 million years ago was like the end of it. So, and then large mammals started to move around, okay? but the closure started earlier, and several animals could have crossed and crossed before the final closure. So depending on the ability of dispersal, animals that could fly or small animals that could fly or swim or cross could probably have gone from one continent to the other. Okay. So that has a lot of impact on the current biodiversity patterns of both North and Central America and South America. So everything I mentioned so far is the result of plate tectonics. So it's the result of the movement of the tectonic plates, and that's very important, for the whole globe. So in South America, the South American continent is here, basically on the western edge of the South American plate. Brazil is in the middle of the plate, and remember, we have the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, which is this mountain chain at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean between Africa and South America, and this is where you have a divergent plate. So the plates are moving away from each other. So the African plate and the South American plate are moving away from each other. And that's pretty fast. If you think about it, it's about 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters a year. So each year you have a little bit more distance between Africa and South America, okay? On the other hand, on the western border of South America, along this blue line here, you have convergent plates. This is where the Nazca plate in the Pacific and the South American plate collide, okay? Then you have the process called subduction, is when, the one plate goes under the other. So the Nazca plate goes under the South American plate. And that has very strong impact on the landscape. And that's basically the main force behind the uplift of the Andes. So the uplift of the Andes is associated with the subduction of the Nazca plate. And that also brings earthquakes and volcanoes along the Andes and along the western ridge of South America, the South American plate. Okay, that's quite important for biodiversity. All right. Although in Brazil we're kind of sort of in the middle of the plate, so those events, they do not affect directly the Brazilian side, but they do have effects on the biodiversity of South America, which also has influence on the Brazilian side. This is an elevation map of South America to give you an overview. So you have the impressive Andes along the western border. So you have elevations, really high areas, almost 7,000 meters of elevation along the Andes, the Altiplano here. You also have the Guyana highlands here, mostly in Venezuela, parts of Guyana and Brazil, but most of them are in Venezuela, where you have the tepuis, the amazing tabletops depicted in many books and films. Then you have the Brazilian highlands, which is this group of area here, which is not, of course, not as high as the Andes. The mountains here is not that high. The highest point here is less than 3,000 meters. So it's half the size of the Andes, or less than half the size of the Andes. But still, it's pretty. The whole area is usually at around 800 to 1,000 meters. Okay, in the central Brazil plateau that we call. You have the Amazon basin here. Okay, so this huge area, and it's amazing that you go, as far as here in Ecuador, and you are like less than 200 meters above sea level. Okay, so if you go from here to here, you travel thousands of kilometers, and the elevation is basically the same. So it's a pretty long and flat area throughout the Amazon basin. And also you have the Paraná-Paraguay basin here in the south, opening to the La Plata River. So this is also a very lowland flat area, which stretches all the way to here. Okay, this area here is the Pantanal, which is a large wetland that we're going to look more closely later on. But that you see, it's pretty limited by the Brazilian highlands, and it connects to the Paraná-Paraguay basin. Okay. And finally, so going into the biomes, this is a map of global biomes. So the biomes from a global standpoint, which is a bit different from what we're going to cover here. We're going to go over the biomes from the Brazilian standpoint, which is a more specialized thing. But if you think about globally, so you have the Amazon forest here covering this whole area. And you see that most of it is in Brazil, but it's also in the Guianas, in Venezuela, Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, Bolivia. They all have parts of the Amazon. And then this is a moist broadleaf forest, so humid forest with large leaves. The same kind of habitat is on the eastern coast of Brazil, going into northeastern Argentina and eastern Paraguay. That's the Atlantic forest. Okay, so the Atlantic forest and the Amazon, if you think globally, they're the same kind of moist broadleaf forests. Okay, and they're very similar, right? But we're going to treat them separately here. But they're same kind of, but they have different species. So the composition of plants and animals is different, and there's several other differences among them. But on a global scale, they're pretty similar. They form the same kind of global biome. Under grasslands, savannas, and shrublands, globally speaking, okay, you have the light green here. So you have the Cerrado, which is this light green area between the Atlantic forest and the Amazon. Okay, so this in green here is the Cerrado, and it goes into the Chaco in Bolivia, Paraguay, and Argentina. And you also have the Pampas here, okay, the grasslands here in the south. Okay, so under the grasslands, savannas, and shrublands, you have both the Pampas and the Cerrado, which are very different. I mean, here, I believe you have a big difference between what's here and what's here. It's hard to think of them as the same unit, but globally speaking, broadly speaking, they're classified under the same kind of biome. In yellow here, you have the flooded grasslands and savannas, or the Pantanal. Okay, so this area here, which I mentioned before. And also, finally, you have in the northeast, you have this really dry xeric shrubland called the Caatinga, okay, in the northeast of Brazil. It's the only biome that's only in Brazil, right? Because the Amazon is shared with other countries, the Atlantic forest is also shared with other countries, the Pantanal goes a little bit into Bolivia, the Cerrado also goes up here and here, but the Caatinga is only occurs in Brazil. Okay. When you think about species richness, this is just an example with two groups of animals, mammals and amphibians. So this is a map of the number of mammal species per square kilometer, and the darker it is, the more species you have. So we can see that you have more species in Western Amazon, like kind of bordering the Andes here. Okay, and also somewhat dark here in the Atlantic forest, a little bit here, but the darkest area is probably here in Western Amazon, border between Brazil, Peru, and a little bit of Ecuador and Colombia, and a little bit of Bolivia too. If you look at amphibians, you have a very similar pattern, along the Atlantic forest, especially here in southeastern Brazil, a lot of species of amphibians. Again, in Western Amazon, Ecuador, Peru, and Western Brazil, lots of species here in the Guyana highlands as well. Okay, just to give you an idea of the overall. So you have a lot of species in the Amazon. That's one of the most diverse places in the world, and also a lot of species in the Atlantic forest as well. When we look at humans, settlements, or cities and towns and rural occupation as well, that's the pattern we have in South America. Remember that South America was except for Antarctica, South America is the last continent that humans reached. Okay, so probably about 16,000 years ago, humans who came from Asia into North America through the Bering Strait and down through Central America and got into South America, and we have fossils of humans in South America at about 15 to 16,000 years ago. Okay, and then from that point, dispersed throughout the continent, but still you have really empty areas, especially in the Amazon, especially in Western Amazon here, the Brazilian part, in Colombia and Venezuela and Peru, and parts of Bolivia. So you have a lot of areas without without strong human occupation. Most of human occupation in Brazil is along the coast, right? We also have, the Patagonia here is also not very populated. This area here, northern Chile and Argentina, also not very populated, but it calls attention the Amazon. Okay, so the most populated areas are those, Pacific coast, Atlantic coast, the Andes, and the La Plata river basin, right? Argentina and Uruguay. And the least populated place, the Amazon basin, the Guyana Highlands. The Cerrado is also not that populated, and Patagonia. Okay, that's it.